Welcome to Lola and the Poets, a podcast on the magical reel. Hello and welcome to our 10th show. Our guest is Christopher Moss. He is from Britain. He's an energy healer and an activist, and we'll be talking about his work and his life, his philosophy, and plenty else. So stick around.
Hundreds of thousands of people are going to listen to him over the radio. And unless he says something that's sensational, it's just no good.
Welcome to Lola and the Poets. Our guest is Christopher Moss. He is an energy healer, an activist, and an ex-bagman. And welcome, Chris.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Hello. So we were just discussing that we actually started and I haven't pressed the record button. So we had like 7 minutes talking without me recording. And this will just be known to the two of us, what we said. So let's talk about where you are at now and what you're doing, and then we'll take it from there.
Okay, so I'm at a period of great change. I have dismantled much of my old life over the past few years, and only a few weeks ago, my divorce came through. A few months ago, I gave up my business for 20 years, as you mentioned. I was a bagman.
Can you just tell us a little bit about your business? Because I just find that really cool, especially where you were placed with that business.
Yeah, so I had a bag shop in Angel in the middle of London, and to a large extent, it was my opt out of any kind of rat race. I made a reasonable living that put a roof over my head and got me a holiday. I interacted with the public all the time, and it's not on the busiest street. It's on it's not a back street either. It's a beautiful market street called Camden Passage. So I would get quite a bit of time if customers wanted to spend some time. I would get quite a bit of time chatting with people from all over the world because the street was in the tourist guides. So it really was a blessing. It was beautiful for 20 years, just chatting to people from all over the world in this kind of, to them, quite a neutral space.
Yeah, first of all, I love the fact that you were situated at Angel. And secondly, I find it really interesting because the place where I come from, Serbia, a lot of people that wind up really doing spiritual work, they always have what we call a day job. Yeah. You know, a lot of them. So the idea of being professional in spiritual work is a very westernized idea of spiritual work, because most of the people that do it, it's either hereditary, it's in family, so people pick it up or figure out they have a talent for it, and then somebody, guides them to the right door, let's say. But they do both things at the same time, and it's not unusual. The only place I saw it as unusual are places that are disconnected with the spiritual. I think that was a very, very good introduction to where you're at now, which please tell us where you're at now.
So that's exactly where I am, but I don't really see it as turning it into my job. I see it as stepping into a role. And if I can make it work, I am hoping to live quite freely and live on donations, to work for free and to accept freely.
Is that you're doing, because that's, as much as you can tell us at the moment, because it's still work in progress, I understand. What schools do you base your work on? What is your experience with it? Yeah, just a little bit about it so we can kind of kick off from there.
Well, so it also stems from the shop. In the shop, and particularly since the last few years and COVID, and there's been an acceleration in my own path through that time. But in the conversations I was having in the shop, the shift in interests of people, so that was hard to ignore. And so whilst I have trained in energy medicine based on Peruvian traditions, and I'm currently training under a Mongolian, and those those traditions and things I've learned will be important on the path going forward. I actually think the encouragement and conversation is going to be as important going forward. So I don't know how I get donations for that. It's, that's a very much a work in progress. I just want to take what I was doing in the shop. I just want to take it outside of commerce completely, and just take it to the street, take it to the road, and be a sounding board for where people are, and an encouragement on other people's path.
When you talk about what you were doing in the shop, it seems to me to be work that is much broader than the work of somebody that's selling a product. In your case, you're selling bags. At the same time, you're creating the space for people to walk in and have a chat with someone that is willing to talk to them about various topics. So it's a space that had been created for a very long period of time, because you've been there for a very long period of time. So you were able to mold and sculpt and hold that space for other people as well. So if you don't mind just telling me about, the schools that you're now involved in. You said a little bit about the Peruvian lineage, and then,
Sure.
Yeah, and then we'll talk about the Mongolian one as well, and then we can move on to England.
Okay. Well, the Peruvian tradition is based on teachings from the Quero, largely, and the person I studied under is somebody called Alberto Villoldo, who is very big online and has definitely gone down the spiritual business model. The teachings are really powerful. The energy medicine is really beautiful. He's not without controversy, Alberto. I think he's very well intentioned. I think, as everybody on this path is not yet an enlightened being, he has his flaws, as do I, and as do his critics. He does, he's criticized as being New Age. He does take things from other spiritualities. He put together a whole program, which is a real privilege to study.
Yeah, I know a little bit about him from background, just because I'm a Rune Soup member, and then I know that Gordon White, who runs Rune Soup, he's the host and runs that program. He's also a student of that school, so I know a little bit about it. I know I've read about it and preparing to chat to you. I read a bit more about it, about him. What I did come away with is two things. Maybe that will help kind of the convo about it.
Yeah.
He comes from a very solid academic background. I understand he has a background in inter-American studies, and also I think his master in psychology, and then his PhD is also in psychology.
Medical anthropology is also, he got his PhD in medical anthropology, I think.
Okay, yeah, I thought the PhD was in maybe medical anthropology, parallel to, because people can have more PhDs. So I don't know. Maybe we should check, because I read it differently. But never mind. I'm sure that you know better than me. Because I come from my background is psychology, just very straightforward bachelor's degree in psychology, or rather, because it was in Yugoslavia, there was a 4-year study, so that would be like an MA, but we did both the clinical side and the theoretical and applied psychology. So whether I want to or not, I always look through whatever people are doing in terms of healing and therapy through those eyes. It's just ingrained. I cannot not have that viewpoint. So what I got from him is that he knows quite a lot of techniques, of course, and methods rather, from his psychological expertise, and that then he integrated them with the knowledge he got from his anthropological research. He started practicing and integrating the two things in a particular way and creating his own method. I got quite a lot of Jungian, I don't know if he's Jungian because I couldn't really figure that out, but because a lot of what he does is based on working with one's shadow. So yeah, do you mind saying more about it? Because now I kind of create a bit of a understanding for the listeners to understand what it is about and how the work is done.
Yeah, and also I would say I tend not to look at academic credentials, so you might well be right over what is. I did the online energy medicine first, and it's really well put together program. And yes, he comes from a scientific background, so there's even a really heavy nutrition phase in it. One of the, like, for 2 or 3 weeks, and you do some fasting, and from clinical trials, he has all sorts of supplements that you take with the dieta at the same time. And I must say, I felt incredible afterwards. It was like microdosing mushrooms. Everything was brighter, everything was lighter. It was very effective. He has a book out on it, Grow a New Body, he calls the diet. I think he's a very nice man. I have a lot of time for Alberto and what he's put together. It's very much putting things together for people from, like largely the West, largely America, maybe in Europe, it's like a fast track onto a spiritual path. And it is expensive. It is run as a business. I think, so this is purely opinion. I think to understand Alberto and what he's trying to do and how he can appear, is one of the things he talks about a lot is a prophecy of the Kero people called the Pachacuti, which is happening now, which is when the condor rises again after a period of 500 years of suffering, which lays over obviously the suffering of the indigenous of the Americas, and that this is the period post 2012 is the period of the rising of the condor again. And as a part of that, he talks of how the Kero people saw their spirituality being rolled out in the West. And I think he sees himself and the success of his business, the Four Winds, as a part of that prophecy. Not in a messianic way, just as in being a tool, as being a part of that rollout of animistic spirituality. So it is expensive, and it is put together to Western taste, but I forgive it its sins as a whole package, if you see what I mean.
So this is the framework of the work, but the actual one-to-one or group work, what does it consist of?
You mean in terms of the energy work?
Yes.
Or, the energy work is, so I think the most powerful part of Alberto's training is that you have these things. You have 10 rights of the rights of Munai Ki, and again, there's controversy around how those were put together. But in that, in there, you have a connection to the lineage, the Andean lineage. And again, this is controversial. It turns out I knew less about it before I joined, and so you go through an initiation to be connected to the lineage. And when we do energy work with somebody, we call in the lineage, we call in the directions, and call in the lineage. And this probably is the biggest point of controversy, I think, for some Kero people who were not party to him being told he could do this. But what I can say as a practitioner's side is I've got plenty of anecdotal evidence that the lineage turn up and the lineage do the work. And so the lineage don't mind.
I understand really both sides in that, if there are actually two.
Yes.
More. One is the cultural appropriation as it is going on, because a lot of people in the West are turning to different cultures and their indigenous beliefs simply because they could not find, I assume, the right way to connect with their own lineage and their own beliefs. And these are beliefs that were, unlike in the West, nurtured and held through generations. So if I were in the position of somebody in Peru, seeing a lot of Westerners suddenly come and be very interested in my lineage, and then go on into the world and make a business out of it, I would be really pissed off. But on the other hand, from a position of a Western person that has a thirst for this kind of knowledge and not a lot of places they can go to in their own neighborhoods to understand and to quench that thirst for starters, and at the same time the means to travel to different places, I cannot take it in any wrong way that people are doing it because they are actually thirsting for the mystical in their lives. What I wanted to ask you now, to kind of move away from that, because this is just part of what you do, because you do other things, and also you might be in the process of, creating something entirely different. What I wanted to ask you is, because I've been a dweller in England for 2 decades and more, and in the process I also became British. So I have a duality in me, not only in nationality, but also in way of thinking. What I connected with almost immediately is Glastonbury, and my trips to Glastonbury were never connected to the festival, always connected to the place called Glastonbury and the Glastonbury tour. And that was literally for decades a place where I can go and get that kind of spiritual nourishment, along with another place in Essex, which is a monastery, an Orthodox Christian monastery, because that's my lineage. It was very interesting to me that at the same time I had thirst of connecting to the spiritual lineage of where I come from, and I got it in Essex, and then also for where I'm at, where I'm living, and I specifically found it there. And that was really important to me. And that is very important to an animist as well, because you're working with where you're at and what you've got. Yeah. What is in the space in the country you came from, your actual lineage of, your family lineage? What do you find inspiring in that way? And have you ever connected to the practices, the indigenous practices in England? The pagan practices, neo-pagan practices, or Christian practices, or anything of the sort? I assume you did, but if you don't mind telling us a little bit about that.
Actually, not so much. I have not. I've never even been to Glastonbury. How is that? Not the town.
Really?
Wow. No. I've got friends there. I've got and I'll be having a trip fairly soon. But I've never been to Glastonbury. And this, I think, is going to inform, it's likely to inform where my path unfolds. I have never really felt comfortable in the spiritual community in the UK, in the wellness community. I've always felt like a bit of an outsider. And it, in a way, my whole motivation for going on the path that I am about to go on is to try to be or create the space that I wish I'd walked into 20 odd years ago. And so, I mean, I was brought up at kind of insipid Christianity.
Where were you brought up? Because also to kind of locate the geography is really important. So your childhood years, where were you during your childhood?
I was born in Staffordshire, rural Staffordshire in Stoke-on-Trent, and then spent the rest of my childhood in South Wales from the age of 7. So lots of countryside, lots of connecting with nature, but not much spirituality. And really there was a dearth of direct spirituality. Lots of spiritual practices, lots of everyday spiritual practices, a lot of it would have been expressed through either activism or politics or the rave culture or taking drugs and psychedelics in groups. There are lots of what I would call spiritual practices without much direct spirituality for a long time.
You would say maybe it was a fragmented way. There was no coherency to it. There were just episodes. There were just episodes of this need, and then the ways to go about.
Exactly. I'm not even sure if it was supposed to be like this, because now I feel so motivated to try to try to be accessible to the type of young person that I was, maybe young males, maybe young working class males. I feel so driven that maybe I wouldn't be this driven to fill that gap if I hadn't lived this life. It almost feels like it was willful.
I understand. Yes, yeah. You have to go through understanding, living in that kind of space where a lot of things are missing. And by that, when I say, well, a lot of things are missing, I assume as well, as it's more of an assumption because I come from a different background, that a lot of life was about surviving and kind of keeping up living, and maybe
and you know, the cynical sense of British humor and a lot of spiritual stroke wellness spaces are a bit too sort of namaste for a lot of young men, you know, who are sort of trapped in that paradigm.
So do you think it has, because this is it's not a uniquely British thing, but it is a very British thing, which is the British class system. Do you think a lot of the wellness practices are actually aimed not at the working class, but at, let's say, urban dwellers that are more in the middle class?
Well, I try to be careful because there's so much fluidity in it, but I think two parts of the conversation that we're having sort of lay over each other, which is that the class, the class availability of spirituality, and then when you turn spirituality and wellness into a business model, then you end up just kind of by accident, just by blind spot, being exclusive and being exclusionary of people who don't either earn as much money or aren't quite as spiritual, don't move in the same circles. So I think it was quite natural that it's happened. But that's definitely when I feel motivated to attempt to change. And I'm not the only one. I know that this is, you only have to look at the festival circuit, which there are now lots of dry festivals, lots more spiritual festivals. There's spiritual elements and wellness elements to a lot of mainstream festivals. This is the real front line, I think, of opening these spaces up, across gender, across class. So it's I think it's exciting.
When you speak about it and your motivations, I can absolutely understand. And it's very clear to me that you're actually going into spaces that are not usually places where a lot of people that are in the, not only, it's wellness industry, but it's kind of let's say, new age, new spirituality, new magicians. It's the revival, and it's also not only a revival, it's a reinventing of something. So there's a great deal of reinventing traditions, which I think is mostly the main point of contention when we talk about indigenous practices. If you go to India, the practices they're not interrupted for millennia. That's huge.
Yeah, I mean, this is
so, and likewise in South America, maybe a bit less, but the same thing. So I think that the reinvention, in order to package something for it to be appealing enough for people to come and be part of somebody's business, but at the same time learn something more about themselves and, walk away with an experience that would be enriching, is also at the same time a positive thing, because that's how people then get attracted to things that might help them, but at the same time a negative thing because it doesn't come from a place of actual spirituality.
Exactly.
Yeah. And now you're walking into that space.
And I'm very lucky that last year I made a decision to do some training with an organization called Mother Tree Shamanism, which is Mongolian tradition, which is a 10,000-year unbroken tradition.
Right. Yeah.
And that has really, I mean, the teachings are amazing. It's a big undertaking. It takes a lot of commitment because the cosmology of the spirit realm, energetic realm, and the body are so sophisticated. It's actually been repeatedly undermining, and then it's fleshed out my picture and my understanding. But it's been a real process to try to integrate, and these are only the crumbs from the table of that tradition, but to integrate that. And my teacher has been at pains to impress the importance of unbroken tradition and the acknowledgement of the dangers of what we're doing in the West with the sort of the neo traditions and the new traditions. Not that none of the, obviously, like we're discovering.
Right, sorry to interrupt you, but I have to. When you say new traditions, it literally shows you can't have a new tradition.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
You can only have tradition, and you can have something that's new. It's cherry picking the things that suit and leaving the other things out. And I find that quite funny, because you can't really do that. You can. Well, yeah. So yeah, go ahead. Sorry, I just had to react to that idea of new.
I mean, she calls them broken traditions. She calls them unbroken and broken. So the way in the West, in the UK, for instance, we have broken traditions, which makes more sense than neo traditions. It's also, I think, the dangers of it are, because it is quite funny, and I think there's aspects of it that are completely understandable and healthy. But I think what's been impressed on me in this last year is that over the fullness of time, broken traditions have clinical trials, their practices. So if something is good for you but bad for your descendants, that's been weeded out. So there's a big aspect of karmic implications of these, which we tend to lack in the broken traditions because we've only been doing this for one or two generations again, and so there's actually there's a real note of caution with it as well, which is that these traditions, them being unbroken, is not just authenticity. It's also there's an aspect of safety, and not just for yourself, for your descendants. Does that make sense?
I think that's a very important point to unpack a little bit. What you learn in school, it doesn't have to be academia. It can be a school that you're part of now, and that is you learn to first do no harm. That's the most important thing. And I think that with a lot of the new practices that lean on traditions, they might help, but they also might do a great deal of harm. And that is because the people that are part of the practices really haven't gone through what they have to. They really didn't learn enough. It's a fast track, and the fast track is always a left-handed way. Fast track is the definition of the left-handed way. So, you can move very fast, you can get a lot of knowledge, you can become very, very, proficient at what you're doing, but the fall is immense because once you do something that causes harm because you were fast-tracked and you didn't learn enough, you will then, in your own space, in your own karmic space, to use the Hindu word for it, you will cause great damage to yourself and therefore to your descendants. First, you cause great damage to the person that you're working with, which is the most important thing, but as a backlash, it comes to you and then it comes to your descendants. So, just to kind of explain it maybe a little bit to the audience is what we're talking about, is that there's a backlash to everybody's spiritual work, and that is not talked about enough.
Even healing work. I mean,
of course, I counted into the spiritual. Yeah.
Every healing that somebody does, you're getting karmically entangled on one level or another. Even to like my teacher said, that even to a lesser extent, a very, very small extent, even divination, there is a very small amount of karmic entanglement, not something that needs to be resolved.
Absolutely there is. Every time you can be doing a tarot reading, you can do an astrology reading, you can do any kind of divination tools that you use. It doesn't really matter, but you are involving yourself. And once you are involved, you also are part of the resolution. This is what you learn in psychology, in schools of psychology, and that's why you can't become a therapist overnight. You have to go through therapy yourself, because otherwise, if you don't go through therapy yourself, you will be projecting parts of you into somebody else's space that will damage them.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Secondly, because you also have to learn that once you're involved in a therapeutic conversation, you are becoming a part of the other person's not only space, but their ecology.
And I think to draw from something you said there with the psychotherapist, a good and bad psychotherapist, for instance, I think one of the problems that we have is that these traditions that were oral traditions, and then the people with the knowledge would select from the next generation the people who had a big enough cup size, is the expression I've heard.
That's an excellent. Yes, it's a great
to receive the knowledge and to use it appropriately. Obviously now knowledge is transmitted differently now, that it's a little bit more indiscriminate, and obviously with something like psychotherapy, you draw that process out and you stipulate and you get a badge and a hat, but there isn't really that in spiritual practitioners, so that we're in an in-between space at the moment where the oral traditions, if unprotected as oral, then that level of knowledge and potential power becomes more indiscriminately shared for people who haven't necessarily got the cup size and won't necessarily use it appropriately.
Oh yeah, there's it's an interesting in Jungian psychology of the container, that the therapist always has to be a larger container than the person coming from for therapy, because in order for the person coming in for therapy to learn anything, they need to have the right practitioner. If the practitioner has a smaller container than the person coming from therapy, very little can be done.
That's nice.
Yeah. In the tradition that you're in, what it is that you're doing now? What it is? Yeah.
Well, it's been the most amazing year. My teacher is a lineage holder from Darkhad shamanism, from the Darkhad Valley, and she's put together a training program, and it's not training us to be shaman. That's a particular. So even the word shaman is. Yeah,
I wanted to ask you about to unpack. Go ahead.
So I kind of feel I feel obligated now to have this discussion whenever the word comes up anyway. So to the best of my knowledge, the word shaman comes from Siberia, Mongolia, and it's a specific skill set of being possessed by a healing spirit, higher power, and doing healing work whilst in that possession trance state. And it takes a lot of work to cleanse and purify yourself to be able to be possessed. And then it's dangerous work. Unfortunately, Russian anthropologists use the word to describe any spirit work, and that's been taken on by the West. So whilst the word is pretty much lost, I always feel a little bit obliged for the Mongolians and the Siberians, because actually it's a much more difficult and tricky skill set, and we've been learning the path towards that, but I don't expect to necessarily get there. But
I think Mircea Eliade's book, and he's Romanian, was very, very influential.
Yes.
What you just said. In the way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So and these people are not to blame. It's academic Chinese whispers really, and And
it's a very I don't know if you read it, but it's a very interesting book, and it has a framework to work with, but at the same time, to be honest, it might have been lost in translation to the West. I think it was. I don't think it was his particular fault. I think it was just how it was taken.
No, absolutely, and I think he took some of his information probably from the anthropologist. No, exactly, and I actually bought that book, by the way, at 17, and it went missing the next day in circumstances I couldn't explain. And only looking back on my life, I wonder if I was held back from my path. Because actually, I bought that book, Shamanism, when I was 17. I do have a copy now. Yeah, so the work I've been doing in the last year, that's what I was, and that's what it's even my relationship, it brings things down to such a basic level. It's like relearning spirituality, relearning the depth of the spirit realm, learning how to make offerings, learning the relationship with the fire. It really is back to basics from a tradition. It's been an amazing course and very humbling in that respect, really bringing me down lots of pegs that maybe the slightly new age journey had allowed me to climb.
Yeah, I find it I mean, every tradition has a medicine man. There are medicine men in England. There's a tradition of it in Serbia and in the Balkans, but in this area, they're called travari, which is herb men, or vidari, which is healing men. But it's interesting because vid also means seeing things. So healing is in the word itself is contained that it's also seeing things.
Nice.
It's very interesting, but I've been to quite a lot of them, and especially in my 20s, and I was really, I always was curious, and I continue to be, but there was a time that I was really quite interested, so I visited both men and women. As I'm interested in that, but that was, and it was very connected to the land, very connected to spiritual landscape. When I talk about spiritual landscape, I mean both the spirits of the land. So there's parts of it that has to do with Slavic paganism, and there's parts of it that has to do with Christianity, early Christianity, Orthodox Christianity. It's syncretic. Quite a lot of them are actually quite syncretic in what they do, and I think that's the case everywhere in the world. They were always allowed, even like during socialism, it was absolutely fine, but it was part of folk wisdom. So I think that with the Mongolian tradition, which I know little about, not a lot, but something, it had this because, of course, of the Mongolian politics, let's say. It was left to develop and continue on its own because it was so strong that it couldn't have been taken. And I think that they had the very same way of viewing these things in socialist Yugoslavia, is that they understood that it's very important to just let it be. It's quite curious because at the same time, we were not taught religion in school, we were taught Marxism. And also, like in everyday practice, people used to, and they still do, drink coffee and then turn the cup, and then they would read each other's, they would divine from the cup. That would be like doctors and lawyers and nurses and factory workers, anybody that had some kind of proclivity or interests, that would be interested in that, or just talent really, or something taught from like a grandmother. So it would be somebody that was completely into something that has nothing to do with divination, but you were very good at reading cups and people would know. So they would ask you. Although there's now, it's a different story. Let's not get into, because it's a lot of it in this society is very westernized. So at the same time, there are a lot of people making a lot of money out of it. And then there's that created a backlash because, of course, it's nothing really to do with the old schools. It's to do with the commercial aspects and a lot of different schools from different parts of the world and so on and so forth. So it's a different landscape now. But this was what it was before. How's it in London? Because a lot of the people that listen to my podcast actually have nothing to do with the West. They're from different parts of the world. But how's it in England and how's it specifically in London? What are your views on, let's say, the landscape of small spiritual businesses?
I mean, I think the wellness community is probably the cornerstone of that. Although there is something interesting happening with Christianity at the moment, there seems to be quite a lot of people turning back to Christianity, which I think is an interesting conversation for later. But in terms of in London, and I would say most practice is based on wellness practices, be they yoga or breathing, or it's almost down a hard to separate the spiritual health and health movements. I think that's where the crux of the business seems to be, to me.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of the way the indigenous people view spirituality, when I say indigenous, we're talking about indigenous practices and lineages that are unbroken and for thousands of years, is that it is just one thing. It's not two or three things. Your health depends on your spiritual state of mind, and then of course connection with the body. But I think that what it does with the Western way of fragmentation, in order to be specialized in things, you have to fragment your knowledge.
And to commodify.
Of course, first fragment, then specialize, then commodify.
Exactly.
And that is why there's, when you say, oh, it's wellness, but they also do the health, spiritual, but also do the health, and it's in the lineage you're now or schooling yourself in, is literally it's the same thing. So what I wanted to ask you is then, in that landscape, in that space, where would you situate yourself now?
So one of the reasons why I wanted, because I've got, it's not just the spiritual business models I've got in my sights. I've got the whole idea of business in my sights. But one of the reasons for sort of embracing the gifting economy, if you like, is so that I don't have a motivation to do more work with somebody. The whole idea is to improve habits and improve health and empower, rather than to create clients. On which most business models depend. So really, honestly, I'm at the moment, I don't really see how it goes forward. I mean, but my idea at the moment is just to allow synchronicity to bring the right people into my path, who encourage and help them with habits and help them on their path if that's what they want. And that's it. And just keep moving on.
What is it that it entails? What is it that if you could just take us through, let's say, one session with you?
Well, this is the thing. I don't think, sometimes it just entails a conversation, because somebody just needs to, remember that the first step on spirituality is eating well and sleeping well. It's not, that's where the lack of business model is makes it really healthy. I just see myself being of service and assessing what is needed in that situation. If somebody wants to work on something, an intractable issue in their life, then we can take that to some energy medicine, which is there's extraction work, and there's soul retrieval work.
A bit more about that. Yeah, just what is the process?
So I'm at a tricky point with my explanation of this, because my conceptions are shifting because of the tradition that I'm now laying over my understanding from another tradition, and that's still percolating. But what I am comfortable with is with saying is that in the West we have there was that book, The Energy Body Keeps the Body Keeps the Score. Well, actually, the energy body keeps the score. We all have an energy body that manifests our material body. And through different practices, some of it's spirit work, you can intervene in that energy body and change health outcomes. The concept of soul loss, for instance, is quite consistent around the world. Like a bad experience or even ancestrally bad experience, you can inherit soul loss, leads to some loss of the soul body, which precipitates problems in this lived life. And in the conception that I learned from Alberto, little energetic, ensouled energetic critters, attachments, they can reside in those, and drive bad habits and bad behavior. So often somebody with addiction issues will have quite a few attachments or entities that need extracting before you can really get anywhere.
Yeah, when you say entity, how would you describe an entity attachment? Well,
my conception is that we obviously live in the material realm, and there is an energetic realm, and we are very comfortable with the idea of ensoulment in the material realm. An entity is just a piece of the energetic realm that's ensouled or has agency, that can direct its own destiny. So it can be a little, possibly a little piece of soul from something else. It can be a thought form. If somebody thinks a bad thought about, or if you think a bad thought about yourself often enough, that becomes an ensouled bit of the energetic realm that follows you around and trips you up. And so an entity, as far as my current conception is, can be any of those type of things that has an affinity with your area of soul loss and can reside there and be like a parasite, basically, an energetic parasite.
So to maybe also translate it into psychological language, that's the area where I think he got quite psychological with it. It's also a Jungian framework, as he talked about the idea of soul loss as the basis for neurosis.
Yes, yeah, that's right.
As the same with the spirit attachment as the basis for psychosis, which is a very different thing, but he understood the disturbances very much on the indigenous way of understanding mental illness. So there's where the overlap is, and I think there's where the actual contention is in terms from when the pushback from psychology. But yeah, so to understand the entity attachment is, so let's say, pervasive thoughts, ways we think about ourselves that are very entrenched in times where we were under great stress and we were very young. They're actually energy forms, thought forms, they have a palpable existence. Well, and they're called entities.
I mean, if they're external, they're called entities. But I mean, it's like which precipitates which in terms of the pervasive thoughts, because you can bring soul loss into this lifetime. So then you're precipitating events that compound the traits. Which is why a lot of that type of work is working on soul loss, not even necessarily in this lifetime.
Can you explain the idea of soul loss to the listeners?
I can explain what I understand of it, which is that which is that you have an energy body, and a bad event or a shock. Then a part of that energy body either gets dislodged or flees into the energetic realm, gets separated from this part of the soul body. Alberto's conception was that it flees, it can't deal with it's the part of you that can't deal with the event, and that's the bit that flees. That was Alberto's conception.
Yeah, to be fair, not his, but actually the psychological schools he based it on, and the indigenous teaching that he based it on. But yes, because it's a repressed emotion. Exactly. A repressed, it's the idea of repression is the basis of most psychotherapy, of repressed, let's say, parts of ourselves that we then go back to retrieve. What I see, not for him in particular, but in those kinds of schools, which is neo-shamanism, neo-paganism, just generally a reinventing of old traditions, is that these are also taken into account as actual loss of the energy body.
Yes.
So there's a palpability to it. It's not like the phrase "it's in your mind." It's actually in the ether, or rather missing from the ether. Am I correct in what you're trying to? Yeah.
That's right, and through certain practices that can be retrieved and restored. It is something that's tangibly missing.
Something that's tangibly missing, yes. And then the practice in itself does what?
Well, in my experience, something like you, if you suspect that you might have soul loss that is associated with one problem or trait or another, it's not something you can sort of order. The work is presented in the order that it comes, and normally there is some cleaning up work and an extraction before you get to a soul loss, should there be some. But if you get to the point of soul retrieval, then the practitioner journeys to retrieve that piece of soul loss from the energetic realm and put it back. Now, there's different traditions around the world that do that in different ways. I learned my way from Alberto, but this had some wonderful successes with it. It's beautiful work when it goes well.
I've been through different schools myself, and a lot of them were based on the technique of visualization. And I understand that this one is too. Yeah,
well, there we get this. So this, I can hear my new teacher now in my ear. So there's a difference between journeying through your own subconscious and actually journeying through the energetic realm, and I think there is there's a lot of both in different practices. So I wouldn't call it visualization if it's working as it should do. It would be deep trance work.
Right.
It's very difficult to talk about these things because my whole conception is settling down after a year of different practices.
I know I put you on the spot, but I think it might be.
No, it's good. It's good. No, I love it. I'm still not entirely sure how I feel about it because I've had such wonderful experiences doing the practice, and I'm constantly second guessing myself now. Am I thought projecting? Am I because the way that my current teacher teaches is she doesn't tell us what to expect because she knows people in the West want to be spiritual practitioners, so they just think themselves into having the results that they're supposed to have. So it's been an amazing way to be taught, but it's given me a lot of so constantly now I'm questioning myself. Is this thought projection? Is this actual trance work, or is this my subconscious?
I think that's for me that's the only correct way to go about it. It would be quite dangerous if you weren't questioning yourself and you weren't thinking about it, because
absolutely. And one of the ways that this training has been, it's revealed to me weaknesses in previous trainings, has been the element of mind control. Like we've been strongly encouraged, shall I say, nagged to meditate, have meditation and breathing practices daily, and certain meditations to help to not just to purify ourselves, but to help with mind control. Because if you're genuinely in trance and in those states, then what you think is important, and you can't afford stray thoughts. So, and I don't think that had been stressed nearly enough in previous training.
Yeah.
It's
but to be fair, what you're doing now is you're also learning things from a tradition that has the unbroken lineage, rather than the person that created their own school based on different practices and so on. So it's, of course, I have preferences, and this would be my preference, but there is a reason why there needs to be somebody that comes before you, and a lot of people that come before you, for you to be able to continue.
Exactly. And I think because actually a lot of the New Age stuff is kind of like core shamanism, for instance, is really an academic. So I should explain what core shamanism is. I think in the 1960s, another anthropologist, Michael Harner, did very much what Eliade did, which was to look at different practices around the world and take bits from each, and say and build something called shamanism, which is very much the traditional journeying, banging a drum. That's what most Western practitioners learn. And the reason I mention that now is because, well, what I think they're doing is, and by the way, in the Mongolian we now have to put down our drums. None of us bang the drum anymore. But what I think the core shamanists are doing is creating a tradition. But that's going to take some generations to bed in. You know, that's the thing. It's like I don't think the whole project is without value. It's just that it's going to take generations to bed in, and also when the practitioners when the practitioners enter the spirit realm, then some of them will choose to help to guide the practice from that side too, and the whole thing will become much more powerful. But
yeah, I understand from where I kind of going through things and understanding how things work in different places. What I found, in London and in the West, is that there's a great deal of cosplay going on. So people dress up, they kind of do their thing, take a bit of drugs, have some good time, have a little bit of an experience. But at the same time, there's very little structure to it, not that much depth. There is the positive thing that comes out of it is a feeling of community, and understanding and going out of your own worlds into different ones. But I think the problem with it is that it's then taken at face value that that's what it is, when in fact it's just something that is more an entertainment. And I'm not being nasty saying that. I'm actually being quite, subdued. a lot of it's to do with entertainment and spirituality as entertainment.
There's a lot of ex-ravers, if you don't mind me saying. There's a lot of ex-ravers who no longer take a pill in nightclubs but go and drink a cup of ayahuasca at ceremonies.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
And it's a lot better, but it's still it is a sort of partially commodified entertainment.
Yeah, I mean, can't go and say, well, that's all wrong.
No, of course not. No.
Of course, it will be, first of all, judgy, and then secondly, it will be actually wrong to say that. There's, plenty of things that are good about that, but what is bad about it, or rather, not bad, but can be harmful, which is bad, is that that's it. Because therapy and things that actually have value in the various schools of healing, energy healing, is a lot of it is quite difficult. Like facing difficult things from your life and things that we run away from. There's a reason why we ran away from them.
It's very challenging, yeah.
Because they were very difficult. These thoughts are really hard to take on. So if you view that the idea of that as entertainment, as in its end something that you do as an experience, and it's an entertaining experience in the end, then first of all, you probably haven't done it right. You just got you surf the upper level of it, and secondly, it doesn't have any true healing value.
I'm sure the healing industry will have its successes, but like anything, we turn it into an industry, and then it gets diluted and commodified and fetishized. Well, I think one of the most profound teachings from the last year has been the most unglamorous, and I think this is essentially what the sweet spot I want to try and hit going forward is the concept of merit in the sort of Tibetan Mongolian conception. Merit is the way to change your karma, and merit is basically good deeds, and it's such an unglamorous spiritual cure-all.
Unglamorous is the perfect word, because it's the absolute opposite as what it presents itself when it presents itself as entertainment. The people that had the most profound effect on me were people that you would pass on the street and not even have a clue that they're really masters at what they do.
Yeah, exactly. So, and it's ingrained into their lives and their habits. That's the thing.
Yeah, they don't dress up for it. They're just it. They are that. Yeah. And they are actually very invisible. So that's another thing. There's an invisibility element that whoever's really truly from their soul seeks them, they will find them, but they will not be advertised as such. I mean, it's also not that bad to go through experiences that disappoint you, because then you can figure it out by yourself. Nobody will tell you, listen, this guy or that woman, or that's not really where it's at. But through your experience, you will then understand and know much better.
Yeah, there's plenty of, there's a well-trodden path of missteps on the Western spirituality path, that's for sure, at the moment.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you a little bit to shift and go through that third element, that is activism. I wanted to ask about that part of your life. Where you are now with it?
Okay. So where I am, I put a lot of faith in what I call sharing politics, which would be naturally left-wing politics, I guess, in terms of leading towards a world of greater justice. And in the last few years, I pivoted away from that as to I see there's a lot of prophecies about this time from different traditions. And the Mongolians have one and the Peruvians have one about this very time, about this very era. And it feels like a lot of the work of the revolutionary socialist is going to be done in the collective unconscious without guns. And so I feel like the work I'm stepping into doing is my activism now.
Yeah, that makes sense, yeah.
Because that's to that end, you know. It's and I was at a ceasefire protest last week, because this is recorded at the time of what we call the October 17th war, whatever you want to call it, the trouble in Gaza. And I was at a protest last week, and there's always revolutionary socialists handing out literature at protests. And I had some very interesting conversations along this very line, that, you know, revolutionary socialism was an understandable idea in the 19th century for trying to bring about change early. But I think we're at a point where we don't need to violently think about that. I think that process is now well underway. And we can think about much more. We can think about aligning with that process. And actually, a few of them were receptive. Most of them not so much.
What kind of activism were you involved in your past? Is there any particular cause that you're very passionate about?
Well, the current situation, the Middle East has always been close to my heart since the early 90s, when I moved to London, and I lived with a Jewish family who non-religious but non-Zionist. And I learned a lot about that situation. So I've taken an interest in that for the last 30 years. I've been to the area a couple of times.
Oh, yeah. So what did you visit?
I went on a cycle through the West Bank from Nazareth to Hebron in 2013 called the Peace Cycle. And it was an amazing experience. I'd wanted to go to the area for a long time. I lived in the States during the September 11th. I had a 6-month visa. I stayed there for 6 months, and during September the 11th, and I would get into lots of discussions, having watched their media and their slant on things. I would get into lots of discussions advocating for a Palestinian voice, and something that was said to me many times was, because I would tell them they couldn't believe their media, was that I'd never been there, and so how did I know? So it really set the intention to go. So I went on this cycle, which was wonderful, with a group of people from all over, and we cycled from town to town, sometimes staying with local Palestinians, sometimes in hotels, meeting. And we meet bereaved mothers groups, protest groups. We met politicians. It was an amazing, informative a couple of weeks, and then I met some friends in Israel. That was my first trip, and the second trip I went the very next year because they were doing they did the second Palestine marathon, and I ran the Palestine marathon. I went there on my own and stayed for a couple of weeks, and also visited friends in Israel that time. So it's
What do you think draws you to that area? Why are you drawn to it?
well, it's hard. Like I've had I've upset a few people with social media posts and been accused of anti-Semitism recently, not because they're anti-Semitic, just because of my level of interest. And it's you know, one of the things I always try to put that in the context of, it's like I knew the name of Bethlehem and Jerusalem before I knew the names of London and Manchester. It's an unusual part of the world. It's like, as somebody who's brought up a Christian in a country that celebrated the birth and resurrection of Christ, it's hard not to be. Like when I visited there, to actually walk through Nazareth and to actually be in Bethlehem, it was even though I wasn't at that time in any way a Christian, it was still really profound that these places exist and they weren't just like something from a movie.
And there's also the involvement of your own country in the area as well.
Well, exactly. So when you start to learn more, exactly. And I think it's beholden on British people to take an interest and to accept responsibility. But then it's beholden on us to accept responsibility for a lot more than just that too. And the thing is, when you learn more about the situation, it becomes to represent this grueling piece of collective shadow work, and I really feel for both sets of people right now, and I think one of, like, obviously I'm advocating at the moment for a ceasefire and a recognition of Palestinian human rights, but I also see in sort of Zionist Israelis, I see people who have to realize where they've come in the last 75 years from the terrible atrocities of the systematic execution of their people to being oppressors and systematically expelling another people. And I think that's an awful piece of shadow work to have to go through. And I feel like it's on behalf of all of us. I feel like the emotions and the dissonance and the difficulty there, to be the souls that are going through it on behalf of all of us on both sides. So that's how I feel about it.
Mm-hmm. I have an opinion of it. Everybody probably does in the world.
Yeah.
It's that thing. It's one thing. It's because it is geographically a place that so many of all the Abrahamic religions came from.
Yeah.
And secondly, I mean, I have the childhood living in the Middle East. Of course, it was Iran. It was not Israel, and kind of it is different. It is different, but at the same time, I think I understand. Not to be that certain about it. The problems connected to living in such a contested place. Also, I come from the Balkans, and the war in ex-Yugoslavia, and what happened in the 90s. There's great echoes, and that I can see from what's going on now in the area. I think that most of us, truly, even people that are very well versed in history, lack a lot of elements of understanding that space, because a lot of it about it is entirely unique. It's a very unique space and a very unique history. Let's say that I can make parallels with ex-Yugoslavia. I could, but then there was a period of time where in Yugoslavia all the nations were living in harmony, and between the wars. Or if we are going to say harmony, it was generally harmony. Of course, there's problems, but the idea behind it was to create a space for all nations, and there was a lot of mixing of ethnicities. So between the wars and between the conflict, there were periods of actual life together, and that experience then informs the healing after the war and after the conflict, because there's a reference point of actual, living together. I can understand entirely and fully, can put myself in the place of both people in Israel and people in Palestine. And I understand the reason behind why Israel is so important to Jewish people everywhere, because of the history of the Jewish people. And then on the other hand, I can also understand the Palestinian point of view of living on the land and then suddenly having to be dealing with an immense tectonic shake of how the land will be managed and who will be on it and so on. So, I mean, it's what I am at the same time very worried about. The tribalization of the politics is working away from a dialogue, not towards a dialogue. And for all conflicts to end, there must be a dialogue. So that's where my personal issue is. Everything that I see is just there's a demonization going on, which I'm very uncomfortable with, of the Israeli people. It is called anti-Zionism, but a lot of it is anti-Semitism, which I encountered personally living through. Like, people would be very open about anti-Semitic remarks and going, oh, no, but that's anti-Israel. And I mean, not now, but like throughout the years, which the in the way they wouldn't be comfortable being racist, let's say, because the fact that they disagree with the politics of the state of Israel, or rather the party that's currently in power there, gives them the right to say lots of things that are actually targeting a particular ethnic group. And then on the other hand as well, it's a long tradition in Europe of anti-Semitism. It's, it's not a joke. In fact, it's one of the darkest periods of European history, are directly connected to anti-Semitism.
Exactly.
Exactly.
I feel like this is the weight that's currently on the Palestinians, is the weight of European bigotry and racism, and I feel like it's that weight of guilt and of those 2,000 years that is currently on the Palestinians, which is this sort of impunity with which then everything is met with. And it's why in my own opinion, I think just acknowledging the Nakba is one of the most crucial aspects of starting a dialogue, because it's not the Palestinians that did that to the Jewish people. So acknowledging their initial trauma of the Nakba is an important part of the reconciliation process for this process.
I think that it's also having to do, because you're British and I'm also British as well, although not indigenous British. I see a lot of talk about what Israel is doing, but not that much talk about what the British Empire did in the period that did deepen the crisis. And I think that what I dislike when I see, different talking heads talking about the conflict, is not to throw shade at the British Empire, but to be absolutely aware that this is a place that it's not about two people. It's about involvement of different powers in this conflict. It still is. And it still is. And when I talk about the Palestinian side, then we also have to understand, I think, and it would be fair to do so, of how much investment there is from the Arab world. And also from places like Iran, which is not part of the Arab world, but is part of the Muslim world, in the Palestinian fight. And the way they're used as proxy there, the same way that Israel is used as proxy for the interest, let's say, of NATO and so on. So there is a lot of elements, and what we're witnessing is a human catastrophe.
I mean, Britain's a really interesting case because both the major parties and most of the major networks are very much singing from the Israeli narrative, but social media and the public is very much singing from a Palestinian narrative, and there's very, very little sort of contextual middle ground. And I think that it's part of the way I think that social media, people blame it for being polarizing. I think it's only polarizing in as much as that it gives exposure to all the narratives that were always there. They just all have exposure.
I mean, there's a lot of narrative hustlers out there. There's a lot of people making money spreading a certain narrative. That's also to be taken into account. Whether directly they're direct agents of any particular agency, or they're just chances that dive into a narrative in order to get more views. So that's also to be taken into account. If you watch YouTube, you have so many people on it talking about the conflict, and a lot of people listening to them. And so that's the kind of creating more and more and more confusion while we're witnessing human suffering on such a large scale. And also, when the 7th of October happened, there was immediately, which I really had an issue with, immediately people were taking sides. Wait for a second. This is something that happened to the Israeli people. So why not give it an actual space and think about what's going on from point of view of both are humans, both are humans going through pain. So whether or not your politics is this way or that way, it's entirely irrelevant because there's some humans going through some very, very horrific experiences.
This is something that I was accused of. I made a post because I was terrified when it happened. Obviously, the images and of a terrorist attack and of suffering. But then I was terrified quite quickly about what the response of what I perceived to be an extremist, nationalist, right-wing government, the most extreme iteration of Netanyahu government that there's been. I was very quickly concerned about what could follow. So there wasn't much space because, and I actually I felt bad because I'm somebody who follows certain news outlets, certain Palestinian voices. I was aware of how much pressure there was this year, how many what was going on at Al-Aqsa, what was going on in Jerusalem, what was going on in the West Bank, villages being burned down. I was aware, and I hadn't shared any of that all year. And then when this event happened, and to most of the world, it happened out of the blue. Most of the world, it happened as a standalone event. So quite quickly, my thoughts were of anxiety. Not that I took sides, but very quickly, and I could see there was Israeli flags above Whitehall. There was any context. It's like trying to take what's happening in Gaza without the context of October 7th. It's taking October 7th without the context of what happened in the rest of the year is just the same thing. I don't, and it's turned out that way. It was. I feel like it was.
I think the moment absolutely in itself deserved a display of solidarity and empathy. And I think that I'd say that coming from somebody, I'm somebody that comes from Milosevic's Serbia, right?
Yeah.
So the fact that somebody like him was ruling the country, most of the ways that he got to power had nothing to do with democratic elections, and certainly in the late 80s, no elections of the sort. And then afterwards, the way he maintained power, it's a kind of a full democracy. So you have a space in a country that has at any point of time at least half its people extremely against what the policies of that country are, yet powerless to change it, even through years and years and years of activism and serious pushback. But it's impossible because the power and the money and the military and the intelligence work is all in the hands of people that mean no good. And there is a demonization of the entire Serbian nation because of it. People not going saying, oh, it's Milosevic doing these things and Milosevic's policies, or rather the extreme wing, it is the Serbs. And I see it now happening with the Israelis too. The same way I would not take all the Americans to be responsible for all the atrocities done in their name, or Brits, or any other country. There needed to be a reaction, obviously, but what the reaction was, I just don't understand it. The scale of it and the length of it and the relentlessness of it, I not only do not understand it, I cannot even see how that would be in any way an outcome that would be wanted by the Israeli people. So to make that clear.
Nope.
But on the other hand, I also see the going into the extremes of how it's creating a larger and larger and larger a canyon, if you will, of misunderstanding between sides, and that it won't stop until there is a dialogue.
No, that is how it will end, but how far away that is, we don't know. I just wanted to respond to a couple of things in the respect of on social media. Most often, when I was posting in that early period afterwards, the trouble is with the internet, you're posting to everybody, but actually the narrative I was trying to counteract was the British media narrative and the British parliamentary narrative, which, by the way, we still don't have a frontline politician willing to call for a ceasefire. We don't have journalists with spine enough not to go whichever way the establishment wind blows. So often I actually feel like, because there's such an establishment narrative on this.
Where's your establishment? Let's be very
exactly
about it. Because it's not a narrative. Yeah, it's not an established narrative everywhere.
But yes, exactly. Yeah, but I mean, in the UK, what that does is that puts people like me in the firing line, because I feel I then have to try to counteract that, use social media for one of its uses, which is to promote a narrative. I then have to try to counteract that narrative and pressurize our media, our journalists, to stay relevant by spreading information that is counter to their information, or at least give context to it. And what that does is put everyday people into the firing line, because at that point it was completely biased, and the whole of our politics was. So the reaction is within the context of what's going on in Britain, really. Unfortunately, the posts also get to other people outside of that who can be hurt by it, can feel ignored by it, or not seen by it. And the other thing I wanted to say was, in terms of there are brave Israeli voices who want a ceasefire and want a return of the hostages, which is through diplomacy, and who want an end to occupation. And one of the things I've really been at pains to do is amplify those voices, because I think they are key.
Yeah,
they're key to a way forward.
A lot of people are actually very vocal. A lot of Jewish people, and also people from Israel, Jewish people around the world, and also people from Israel, are very vocal about it. They were also very vocal about how they feel about the government. That's not like a new thing. But I wanted to kind of go a little bit away and kind of start winding up the convo, because we went into deep dive. And to be fair, I did ask you about what your passion was, and it's very clear that you feel very passionately about the cause, and also that you continue to be passionate about the cause.
Well, I mean, I have a fantasy in my head that because I've learned to do. I'm in the process of learning very healing land rituals based on the Mongolian cosmology, very powerful healing land rituals. And I do have there is a part of me that would love to go to that part of the world and do some there, so marrying the two conversations and the two passions together.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, when do you plan to go to Mongolia, and do you?
Yes, I am. So the school Mother Tree Shamanism, they have another class starting in April, by the way, and they run pilgrimages every summer to the Darkhad Valley, and I am really hoping to get the resources together to go to on pilgrimage, meet my teacher, because we've been learning online, and some of the other people from the class, and go on pilgrimages to the Darkhad Valley this summer.
So soon. The answer is soon.
Yeah, soon.
As soon as possible. Yeah.
Yeah.
And speaking of land, we did a little bit of talking about that in that part of the podcast that nobody will hear because it wasn't recorded. And but it's kind of nice to end the conversation with that rather than begin with it. So if you were to see yourself now on the path that you are now as a child, what would you think of it? What would you, as a 7-year-old boy, if you could please situate yourself where you were at 7 years? I don't know why I chose 7, but that's, it's a good number. That boy that, as we said in that part of the convo, had experiences that you could not find context to, mystical experiences. What would you think?
Honestly, I'd probably, the first thing I think would be, where's the wife and kids and the 2 cars? Come on, what are you doing? That's probably the first thing I think. I honestly don't know what that guy would think of me. I really, truly don't. I think because there was such a long way to come from where I was, from what I was embedded in, that this satisfies, that this is definitely satisfying the soul part that's inside that guy. But there was a lot to peel off before I got here. There was a lot to peel off.
Can you tell us what that child was and who he was then?
Yeah, I was born in Stoke and brought up in Cardiff, and brought up in post-industrial rural Staffordshire, and I had weird mystical experiences. I was very empathetic. I would cry at other people's pain all the time, but I was sort of embedded in a sort of loving football and being naughty, and then when I got to the age of it, getting drunk, culture, and it took a long time for me to really separate those things, to really see through those things and see and get to this. I honestly don't know what that guy would make of it. And as I've said, this is the motivation for me now, is to be somebody that guy meets when I'm a lot younger than it.
Yeah.
Than it happened.
That's a very good way to put it. To kind of meet yourself, meet your young self.
Exactly.
And others. Yeah. So, where can people find you?
Where can people find me? Well, I'm on Instagram. It might be quite an interesting journey. It's my current name on there is Chris the Bagman, and I post intermittently at the moment. But I think as the Wandering Healer takes off, it might be quite entertaining. And I do have a splash page that is, I have a website being built, but I do have a splash page, and that's at christusmaximus.com.
I'll put it
CHR.
in the show notes, but it's good for the
Okay.
audio listeners to also hear where you can be found in the virtual space. And where can you be found in the physical?
In the physical space, I'm not sure where I'm going to be found. I've got a few months on my friend's boat. For the next few months, I'm going to do a bit of writing, and I'll do virtual healing. Anybody who wants to track me down through those other two spaces and has intractable problems that we think I can help with, I would love to try to help, or even if people just want to chat. And then I'll go to Mongolia, and then I really don't know. It's going to be in the UK because I don't think I can do the work I do without speaking the cultural language fluently, because there's a lot to unpick. Like, we have such a poor conception of the energetic realm, of the spirit realm, of that to get into those conversations and to have a healthy to and fro, there really needs to be quite a fluent dialogue. So it's going to be in the UK, but that's about it. That's all I know.
It makes sense that it would be in the UK because of the connection to the land, not only the cultural space but also the physical space, because a lot of animist work is done within the realms of the physical. Is there any particular part of the UK that you have specific connection with, a specific place?
Yes,
you really connect with.
Yeah, there's one. I've just done some little land rituals for local land spirits of my childhood because I'm at my parents' house. But actually, there's a piece of land owned by a friend just beneath the White Horse in Oxfordshire, in Uffington, and it's a beautiful ancient piece. All land is ancient, obviously, but inhabited for a long time. And that has been, in the last several years, we've gone there intermittently, and a lot of my experiences of advancement have revolved around this piece of land. And I know it works with me. I've done lots of offerings to it. And we're going to go and very soon and build it a more permanent honouring and offering. But yeah, so that piece of land just underneath the oldest white horse in the country in Uffington. It's a beautiful piece of land.
And do you think that your road, which you have no idea where it leads, but let's say that you thought about it, do you think that a lot of the things that you're learning now, which is within the cultures that are quite far away, the Isles, that it will come back to a connection more with the indigenous practices of the Isles? Yeah,
already I do the practice here, and this is a debate amongst some of the people that practice in the tradition, is do we try to change some of the herbs to the local herbs? And there's a debate on that because even a tradition has a spirit, and so that spirit is supporting you when you stay in this tradition. And so there's a conversation about that. I've no doubt that I've already done those land rituals to land here. I've no doubt that as my conceptions flesh out, and as my spirituality fleshes out, I will both honor those traditions and adapt to and combine with local traditions where it feels appropriate. There's also a curveball that I found out a few years ago. I'm 40% Scandinavian, and I feel very cold towards their spirituality, right. Which is because they have a broken tradition in cedar, and I think some of the things that I'm learning would combine very well with the cedar tradition. So yeah, cider, whichever way you pronounce it.
I'd like to thank you so much for this extensive chat about everything and for being such a good sport and such, so wonderful and opening up and talking about every single thing. I really hope that you enjoyed it too. It's not that easy to be interviewed about one's own life, and I fully understand that. So really well done. You were so good. But yeah, any closing thoughts about the chat or anything else?
No, I'm just thank you very much for having me on and asking me asking me questions. Normally, I'm asking the questions. There were several times through it that I wanted to ask you something back, and I was like, actually, this is probably not the forum. People have heard your things before, so.
No. You should have, but now it's all in the past. Well, hopefully we'll have another chat. Once things move on to maybe another point that you find interesting and that you want to talk about, you're always welcome to talk to me, and then maybe ask me the questions publicly. But yeah, I'm absolutely. I do think of it as a chat rather than an interview. It's absolutely. But it is a focus. There is a focus on things that you do, and the things that I talk about, if it comes from me, are to do with your particular areas and interests. So in that kind of way, it's always about the guest, but it is also about me within that, within that space. So thank you so much, and
Thank you.
And goodbye, and thank you for the listeners for listening to us talking, and hopefully you'll find things within the talk that help you on your own journey. So bye all.